Well, good morning, everybody. It's Sunday again, thank goodness. Let's lift our heart in praise. My name is Janine Cummings, and I'm so happy to be here with all of you. All right, here we go. Early in the morning, when I rise, I lift my hands in praise because I'm alive. And late at night, when I lay down, I lift my heart in praise for the love I found. And I sing, ooh, 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 for the love I found. Sing with me. Early in the morning, when I rise, I lift my hands in praise because I'm alive. That's right. Late at night, when I lay down, I lift my heart in praise for the love I found. And I sing, ooh, 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 for the love I found, for the love I found, for the love I found.
Well, good morning, and thank you, Janine, for that lovely song. Welcome to Unity of Olympia's online streaming Sunday service. And please join me as we start with prayer. We breathe into and settle into this present moment, recognizing the Most High is right here, right now, with each of us and with all humanity. We know that all that we can envision the divine as being, that we are as well, that God is all wisdom and we are wisdom, that God is all understanding and we are understanding, that God is all love and we are love. We are open and receptive to seeing with new eyes, to learning, to discerning, to understanding, and most of all, to opening to our good in each moment. And with great gratitude, together we affirm this prayer in the name and through the power of our master teacher, brother and wayshower, Jesus the Christ. And so it is. Amen.
Do you feel love's presence? Love lives in my heart. Do you feel love's presence? Love lives in my heart. Do you feel love's presence? Love lives in my heart. I can feel, I can feel, I can feel. And do you feel self-mercy? Love lives in my heart. Do you feel self-mercy? Love lives in my heart. Do you feel self-mercy? Love lives in my heart. I can feel, I can feel, I can feel. And do you feel your courage? Love lives in my heart. Do you feel your courage? Love lives in my heart. Do you feel your courage? Love lives in my heart. I can feel, I can feel, I can feel. And do you feel your power? Love lives in my heart. Do you feel your power? Love lives in my heart. Do you feel your power? Love lives in my heart. I can feel, I can feel, I can feel. Yes, I can feel, I can feel, I can feel.
So a man wakes up with a magic lamp in his hand and he rubs the lamp and a genie pops out. And the genie says, You have one wish left. And the man's so excited, he says, I wish I truly knew myself. And the genie laughed and said, Well, okay, but that was your first wish, too. And the man says, Well, what was my second wish? And the genie said, To forget. Well, friends, we are 1 week away from my favorite holiday, Halloween. And yes, it's true. I love candy. But part of why I really love Halloween is the whole idea of dressing up, of putting on a mask, of being someone else. And I love how this idea of playing dress up both helps us explore the truth of who we are and sometimes challenges our thinking about who we are. And so today, we're talking about the metaphysical mask. And we're going to explore first the idea of a mask, and then we'll talk about what metaphysics means and how we apply metaphysical interpretation in unity. And then we'll also talk about how we can use metaphysical interpretation to question, to explore emotions, and to truly know ourselves. So, first, let's talk about masks because we have all had an opportunity to wear many masks this year, including way before Halloween. When I hear the term mask, I think of a variety of things now. I think about Halloween and disguise, but I also think about medical protection and viruses and conflict and discord and disagreement. And so we know that a mask is more than simply a mask. Some have described human beings as meaning making machines. And what is meant by this is that as humanity, part of how our brains work is we assign meaning to stuff. This is often a survival skill. We assign meaning to other people, to their behaviors, to the world around us, to ourselves, to each other. And many times we don't even realize we're doing this. We do it so quickly. The Unity of Olympia prayer team right now is reading a fabulous book by Brene Brown called Rising Strong. And in this book, Brown talks about this process of assigning meaning. So she refers to an experiment where people were presented with multiple pairs of socks, and they were asked to pick the pair of socks that they liked the best, and then to describe why they picked those particular socks. So every person in the experiment picked a pair of socks and they described their reasons for picking the socks, the color, the shape, little differences in the stitching. No one in the study said they didn't know why they picked their socks. And all of the socks were identical. So, as humans, we assign meaning to socks, to masks, and to other events and circumstances as well. And we don't all assign the same meaning. The meaning that we assign differs based on our own experiences, our consciousness, our personal background. This is where, as Unity Truth students, we can use something called metaphysics and metaphysical interpretation as a tool. Metaphysics is a tool that can help us explore what meaning we're assigning to stuff, including other people's behaviors and ourselves. Metaphysics can be a way to see what's in our consciousness, to look at what's behind the mask that we may be projecting onto others, or the mask that we may be wearing around others, or even the masks that we may use to obscure our true self from ourselves. So, we're going to talk about what metaphysical interpretation and what metaphysics mean. Now, I don't know about you, but when I first started hanging around Unity, the word metaphysics tripped me up a little bit. I'd hear people talking about metaphysics, and I had no idea what they were talking about until I read a book called Heart Centered Metaphysics by Paul Hasselbeck. And Hasselbeck in this book includes two definitions for the word metaphysics. Now, in Unity, he says metaphysics is another word for theology. In other words, the study of what God is, what humanity is, what our relationship is with each other. And literally, the word metaphysics means beyond the physical. So, with metaphysical interpretation, we're going to rely on both definitions. We're going to look beyond the physical. And part of why we do this is to better understand what is the nature of God? What is the nature of humanity? What is our relationship with each other? And who am I ultimately? Who are you? Who are each of us? So, in Unity, one way we practice metaphysics and metaphysical interpretation is with metaphysical Bible interpretation. Now, when it comes to the Bible in Unity, we don't invest a lot of energy into whether the biblical stories are true or whether they actually happened the way they were written down. They may or may not have. But we look beyond the surface. We look for a deeper meaning and we ask ourselves, what does the story say about God? What does the story say about humanity? What does the story say about me? And what does the story say about our relationship with each other? Now, I believe that if in the past we have been harmed by religion or harmed by a different type of Bible interpretation, that metaphysical Bible interpretation can also be a source of healing, a way of exploring what meanings have we attached to the ideas of religion or the ideas of the Bible. And we get a chance to evaluate those meanings with metaphysical Bible interpretation, one criteria is that the metaphysical Bible interpretation honors the divine in each person, including ourselves. So if we have a meaning attached to religion or to the Bible that isn't honoring of the divine in others or isn't honoring of the divine in ourselves, we may want to consider assigning a new meaning. And ultimately, metaphysical Bible interpretation is personal. It's about what a passage means to me. It's about what a passage means to you. And we may not have the same interpretation, and that's okay. So, there are many processes for doing metaphysical Bible interpretation. Here's the process that I learned when I was going to school to become a licensed Unity teacher. The first step is prayer. And in prayer, we affirm that God is divine wisdom, divine understanding, and divine love. And since we believe all people are expressions of the divine, we affirm that that divine wisdom, understanding, and love is in all people, including in ourselves. And we affirm that the divine is in the text we're reading and the meaning that we're going to discern, the meaning that will honor the divinity of others and ourselves. We read the story, we look at the words on the page, see what is actually happening in there, and we identify the main events of the story. Sometimes we summarize the story in our own words, especially if it's a longer passage. We may do research about the history of that passage. What were the historical events that were taking place at the time that it was written down or the time that the story was told? And we can also look at the context or the placement of the story in the Bible. What happens immediately before the story? What happens afterwards? And see how it lines up there almost as a work of literature. We can study resources explaining what meanings other people have assigned to names in the story and events in the story. And we can see if these meanings resonate with us. Now, our Unity co-founder, Charles Fillmore, wrote two books on metaphysical Bible interpretation. One is the Metaphysical Bible Dictionary, which includes his metaphysical meanings of names of people and places in the Bible. And the other is the revealing word, which includes his metaphysical meanings of nouns in the Bible. We can use Google to identify synonyms for words or even look at other biblical interpretations from other folks of a particular passage. Another resource for us is unity.org. Unity.org has a column called Interpret This, where two Unity ministers, Reverend Ed Townley and Reverend Jackie Fernandez, have included their metaphysical interpretations of certain passages. But even though we look at what other people think, we still take time then to discern What resonates with me? What does this passage mean to me? Because, as I mentioned earlier, metaphysical Bible interpretation is very personal. As a licensed Unity teacher, I can tell you Charles's interpretation of something or unity.org's interpretation of something, but I would never presume to tell you how you would interpret a passage. And Charles doesn't tell us how to interpret passages either. In fact, famously, when Charles Fillmore was teaching classes, if his students rehashed his own words back to him, he would say, "Yes, but what do you think?" And so when I share my metaphysical Bible interpretation, if you disagree, that's great. You can discern the passage for what it means in your own heart. Now, recently, the spirit group that I'm part of, who has been studying the book Discover the Power Within You by Eric Butterworth, in that group, we encountered Eric Butterworth's retelling of the story of the prodigal son. And so this is a great place to practice metaphysical Bible interpretation. The prodigal son story is in the book of Luke, chapter 15, verses 11 through 32. It's quite lengthy, so I won't read the whole passage, but just to summarize, there's a father with two sons. The youngest son asks for his inheritance and goes out and spends it, lives um, wantonly, I think the passage says, spends his money, ultimately finds himself penniless and working in the worst job that a young Jewish man can have, feeding pigs, which are considered by Jews to be unclean. And then he comes to himself and says, "Oh, hey, even the servants in my father's home have a better life than I do. I'll go home and ask my father. I'll tell him I've sinned. I'll ask him, 'Can I be your servant?'" And the younger son goes home. And while the younger son is far off in the distance, the father recognizes the younger son coming home, runs out, throws his arms around the younger son, welcomes him home. And even before the younger son gets a chance to say, "Hey, I'll be your servant," the father welcomes him and says, "We must celebrate. We must kill the fatted calf. We will put a ring on your finger. We will put a robe around your shoulders because what is lost is now found." Now, the older son in the story hears the party noise from his job in the fields, and he asks the servants what is happening. And the servants say, "Oh, your brother's returned." And the older son gets a little peevish and doesn't want to come to the party. And when the father goes to check on the older son said, "Father, I've been a loyal worker for you. I've worked hard, and you've never given me so much as a calf to celebrate with my friends." And the father says, "My son, everything that I have is yours, and your brother was lost and is now found." All right. So that's a recap of the story in my own words. Now, in the version of the Bible that I use, the New Revised Standard Version, the title of this story is actually listed as The Parable of the Prodigal and His Brother. And I think that's noteworthy because I've read several Unity writers that only talk about the relationship between the youngest son and the father. And for me, when I am interpreting this passage metaphysically, there's a lot of value in looking at the experiences of both sons, the younger son and the older son. I was raised with a very traditional interpretation of this passage. I was told that the Father represents God, the sons represent humanity. This is an example of how God always forgives humanity. And if that's what this passage means for you, that's great. That's a beautiful and very meaningful interpretation. And I'm also struck by the fact that Jesus is not quoted in the Bible as saying that this is the meaning. So, for even folks who might be interpreting the Bible more literally than I do, this is not Jesus's meaning that he's assigning to this passage. I sometimes also find that interpretation, the traditional interpretation, a little frustrating. I don't know if anyone else has a sibling or a parent. Sometimes those relationships are not easy. And in my family, unfortunately, the character in this story that I relate most to is the older son, the snarky one, the one who pouts when his brother gets something nice. Meh. I sometimes struggle to relate to that younger son. It's not very easy for me to go off and celebrate wildly. And sometimes it's hard for me to admit when I recognize I've made a mistake. I also really struggle with the idea of comparing God to a parent. Most parents I know are good people with very good intentions, and they are also very human. And so when I apply metaphysical Bible interpretation to this passage, I am going to look at what is the meaning I'm adding to this story? What masks am I placing on these characters with the goal that I want to better understand myself, others, and the divine? And what meaning I'm assigning? Is it something that serves me personally? And if not, how can I adjust? So here's what I saw when I began taking a closer look at this passage. The parable of the prodigal and his brother is one of three parables in this chapter, the book of Luke, chapter 15. And it's the last parable. So Luke chapter 15 starts this way. It says, "Now all the tax collectors and sinners were coming near to listen to Jesus. And the Pharisees and the scribes were grumbling, saying, 'This fellow welcomes sinners and eats with them.'" So the parable, or the passage starts with Jesus being questioned about who he's spending time with and why. And the people doing the questioning are the Pharisees and the scribes, the people who are generally seen as followers of Jewish law. Now, Jesus famously did not answer questions directly. He was not a yes or no kind of guy. Sometimes he didn't answer questions at all. He was silent. And a lot of times when people posed questions, he responded with questions or parables, stories. And in this instance, when his company was questioned, he told three stories. He told a story about the parable of the lost sheep. He told a story about the parable of the lost coin, and then he told the parable of the prodigal and his brother. So when I put the parable of the prodigal and his brother through the lens of metaphysical interpretation, one thing that jumps out at me is that each character in this story I see as expressing strengths and weaknesses. Each character expresses something divine and something human. For example, the oldest son, some of his divine traits. He works hard. He's very loyal to his father. And he's willing to speak truth to power. When his father asks him why he's upset, he's honest about what's going on for him. And that's something that not everyone has the capability of doing. And that older son is human as well. He compares himself to his brother and he pouts about the party. The younger son expresses some divine traits. He comes to himself. He gains awareness that I am living a life differently than the life I want to lead, and I know how to make it different. And he is willing to admit his mistakes. He's willing to go home to his family and say, I messed up. Again, not something everyone is able to do. Um, and the younger son has some human characteristics as well. He's willful. He, at the beginning of the story, exercises his will for stuff for him that isn't necessarily beneficial for others. Finally, the father exercises some divine traits: forgiveness, love, welcoming. And the father is human as well. He appears to be enabling this younger son. He also appears to not be a great communicator. He's never shared with his oldest son how much he values his oldest son's loyalty. So, with metaphysical Bible interpretation, remembering that each character in the story represents something in my consciousness, then I have the chance to ask myself, what is represented in my consciousness by the Father? What is represented by the oldest son? What is represented by the youngest son? Where do I enable? Where do I fail to communicate well, even to the people I care about the most? Where do I express willfulness, following my way regardless of the impact on others? Where do I compare myself to others? And where do I pout when others appear to receive their good? And where am I willing to change my thinking, to change my circumstances? Where am I willing to admit my mistakes? Where do I work hard and demonstrate loyalty? Where do I express forgiveness, love, and welcome? For me, this story is ultimately about healing, wholeness, and integration. It's about loving those parts of ourselves and others that are not perfect. All three characters in this story, I believe, have the opportunity to forgive each other, to take the high road, to look beyond any mask they may be assigning to each other, and to see instead the good, to be willing to try again. For me, this passage is about remembering that what I see in others and myself, especially if it's negative, that is not the totality of who others are, and that it is not the totality of who I am. That who I am and who others are is greater than any of our limitations. This isn't about excusing inappropriate behavior. For me, it's about opening to the possibility of greatness, the ability to grow, change, learn, and more fully express our divine nature. I believe when Jesus was telling this story to the people around him, the sinners, the tax collectors, the Pharisees, and the scribes, I believe he was sharing not just why he was willing to eat with the sinners and the tax collectors, but also inviting to the Pharisees and the scribes, come eat with us, come join us, learn from each other, share with each other, allow others to learn from you. I believe, again, that this passage is about integration, loving what's imperfect and healing that way. So that's my metaphysical interpretation of this passage. And again, I welcome if any of you want to share with me your interpretation. I would love to hear it. I feel like I learn from hearing how others interpret this passage as well. We can actually apply metaphysical interpretation to stuff other than the Bible. For example, we can use metaphysical interpretation to question our thinking, to delve deeper into emotions, and to more truly know ourselves. Here's an example. I don't know about anyone else. I sometimes say the wrong thing. Perhaps you have said the wrong thing at one point or another as well. And sometimes, unfortunately, I say the wrong thing to loved ones in relationships. I try to remember this when I'm in relationship with someone and they say something to me that may initially be painful. I ask myself, am I too attached to the literal words that they just said? What do I know to be the truth? I know that there's times that we all maybe don't communicate the best way we can. And with people in my life, I know I love them and I know that they love me. And I can let go of the literal words that were said. Or I can say, huh, can you tell me more about that? I'd love to understand better. And I can focus on the love. I can focus on knowing they love me and I love them. If we are applying metaphysical interpretation to items other than the Bible, we follow a similar process to what I outlined earlier. We pray, we affirm the oneness with the divine that we all share. We affirm that we will come up with an interpretation that honors the divinity of all people and ourselves. We will consider how the interpretation reflects what's in my consciousness and evaluate whether that is an interpretation I want to change. We can research what other folks have said about the thing. We can research synonyms or other meanings for that event or that word or that circumstance. And we can get curious. If other people have a different meaning about something than we do, we can ask them with a sincere desire to understand. Can you tell me more? I'd love to know more about how you see it and why. Ultimately, We have the ability to assign meaning and to consider whether the meaning that we have assigned serves us or whether we want to change it. I think Halloween is such a great time of year to practice metaphysical interpretation. There's such richness in some of the symbols of Halloween. If you think about some of the common um, costumes, if you think about monsters, witches, zombies, skeletons, there's so much symbolism and uh, ideas to delve into there and apply metaphysical interpretation. Some parts of Halloween focus on scaring and horror, and we have the ability to look at certain emotions through metaphysical interpretation, such as fear. When is my fear cropping up? What am I telling myself? What meanings am I assigning to things that is prompting that fear experience? Is that the meaning that most serves me? Is that the meaning that honors my divinity and the divinity of others? We can also noodle around with Halloween with that idea of a mask, thinking of what mask do we wear when we're with others? What mask are we putting on others when we project our thinking onto their behavior or we project our interpretation onto their behavior? What mask are we wearing to hide our true thinking from ourselves and dig into that more deeply? In our meditation later today, we'll have an opportunity to focus on a Bible passage that refers to a spiritual costume, and we'll apply some metaphysical Bible interpretation to that passage. But I want to close this talk by affirming that I hope we all celebrate this beautiful time of year, including Halloween, in the way that most fills our heart with joy, whether it's through candy, through dressing up, through exploring some of these symbols of Halloween with metaphysical interpretation or metaphysical Bible interpretation of biblical passages. We know that as Unity Truth students, we always have the opportunity to explore what's in our consciousness and question whether that consciousness is serving us. We know that if we have a strong reaction to something around us, that that thing is a reflection of something that's within us. It's shining a light inside as an opportunity for us to grow, to explore, to integrate, and to heal. And we know that as humanity, we tend to assign meaning to stuff, sometimes even without realizing it. So let's use our tool of metaphysical interpretation to assign the highest and best meaning to ourselves, to each other, and to the world around us. And let's use our metaphysical interpretation to recognize the divinity that each other is and that we are ourselves as well.
We offer one another kindness, one another grace, because we are love, because we are love, nothing less than love. We offer one another kindness, one another grace, because we are love, because we are love, nothing less than love, nothing less than love, nothing less than love.
And so we enter into a time of meditation, remembering that something that is so wonderful about Halloween is the ability to try on a new idea, to act as if. And I invite us to listen to this passage from the book of Ephesians, chapter 6, verses 13 through 17, with metaphysical ears. Therefore, take up the whole armor of God, so that you may be able to withstand on that evil day, and having done everything, to stand firm. Stand therefore, and fasten the belt of truth around your waist, and put on the breastplate of righteousness. As shoes for your feet, put on whatever will make you ready to proclaim the gospel of peace. With all of these, take the shield of faith, with which you will be able to quench all the flaming arrows of the evil one. Take the helmet of salvation and the sword of the Spirit, which is the Word of God. Please join me in hearing a metaphysical interpretation of this passage. I affirm we are one with the divine, knowing that this idea is our highest and best thinking, and we remain centered no matter what. We wrap ourselves in what is always true, in what never changes, the awareness that the divine is in us and in everyone. We see our hearts expressing right thinking and divine love. And to help our hearts stay focused, we rely on our 12 spiritual powers: life, imagination, power, wisdom, understanding, zeal, elimination, faith, love, order, will, and strength. We radiate divine compassion and harmony to all and to ourselves. We understand peace begins with us. We can always return to our awareness, to this place of good news, this place of perfect peace, and know we are always on sacred ground. We know the thoughts we hold have the power to create, and that what we do matters. Our awareness of the Most High, present and active in our lives, protects us against any circumstance or thinking that appears negative. We use our minds and vision for right thinking and seeing, and we speak words that affirm and bless. We are one with the divine, and I invite us to take into the silence that last idea, which I will say one more time. We are one with the divine. We are one with the divine. You are one with the divine. I am one with the divine. We know this is our sacred costume. We know this is what is behind the mask. And we affirm this oneness in the name and through the power of our master teacher, Jesus the Christ. And so it is. Amen.
Let's show the world who we are. I can show the world just who I am, who I am, who I am. I can show the world just who I am and feel safe and feel free. Sing with me. And feel safe and feel free. Feel safe and feel free. And feel safe and feel free. Feel safe and feel free. And you can show the world just who you are, who you are, who you are. You can show the world just who you are and feel safe and feel free. And feel safe and feel free. Feel safe and feel free. And feel safe and feel free. Feel safe and feel free. And we can show the world just who we are, who we are, who we are. We can show the world just who we are and feel safe and feel free. That's right. And feel safe and feel free. Feel safe and feel free. And feel safe and feel free. Feel safe and feel free. And feel safe and feel free. Feel safe and feel free. And feel safe and feel free. Feel safe and feel free. Oh, I feel that.
Well, friends, it is an honor to spend time with you this morning. If you have felt blessed by this online service, please share it with others and please consider a donation at unityofolympia.org to continue to allow services such as this to be made possible. And now let's close with prayer. The light of God surrounds us. We are light of God. The love of God enfolds us. We are love of God. The power of God protects us. We are power of God. The presence of God watches over us. We are presence of God. Wherever we are, God is, including right here, right now, and all is well. And so it is. Amen.